What up, what up? I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner, here for round 2 of our conference championship NFL DFS video series, this time between the 49ers and the Packers, Sunday afternoon. NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, both FanDuel and DraftKings for the single game showdown slate. San Francisco, Green Bay. Be sure to subscribe below. That way you're notified when all of our DFS videos are released. All right, if you haven't already, definitely check out our Chiefs and Titans video. It was posted earlier today. This will be a similar setup, about 10 minutes, going through low risk, high risk options, lineup strategies, and some notes for different players. So let's start with injuries first and foremost. Allen Lazard left last week's game early. As you'll see, ended up with a big 0 in the receiving column, but did get 1 carry for 5 yards. Left very early with an ankle injury. He did return to practice. I don't believe he's listed on the injury report, and he should be good to go to resume his number 2 receiver role for the Pack. All right, let's take a look at low-risk contests. You know our strategy by now. If you watch this video, if it's your first time, what we try to do in our 50-50s, head-to-heads, double-ups, small field contests for showdown and single-game slates, try to fit in both quarterbacks, try to fit in both running backs. That essentially locks up all the touchdown scoring on the slate, and then we fit in any values or defenses or kickers that can make those guys all fit into one roster. So if we do this with this slate, and we go, let's just say Aaron Rodgers is our captain for now, Jimmy G, Aaron Jones, now we have decisions to make, right? Because we have the split backfield in San Francisco. And then we're also leaving high target guys out like Devontae Adams, who, if we look, his target numbers are absolute insanity. 13, 16, 13, 11 over the last 4 games. George Kittle, not as high as Adams, but 17, 8, 7, 5 over the last 4 weeks. And it's always tricky to leave out these high volume guys. However, they are at volatile positions. We saw this very exact scenario last week where George Kittle ended up 75% owned in double ups on the showdown slate. And even though he got 5 targets, disappointed with just 4.6 DraftKings points. So it can happen. And you may lose a slate here and there, but over the long haul, proven strategy is getting both running backs, both quarterbacks, and fitting in value after that. Even if you are leaving high volume receivers like Adams and Kittle out of your lineup. So now, if we need to do this, who are we going to fit in at San Francisco running back? Tevin Coleman or Raheem Mostert? Now, we talked about it in our podcast. We talked about it in the Daily Plug. And last week, Raheem Mostert played 34% of the snaps. Coleman was up higher than that. Coleman ended up, though, with 22 opportunities. That's targets plus rushes. And Mostert ended with just 12. And a big reason for this, because this was a reversal over the last 3 weeks of the regular season. Mostert, if we see here, still 10 plus rushing attempts in 6 straight games, and missed most of the third and fourth quarter last week with cramping in his calf. Said he was sick during the week, was dehydrated. Back to full practice this week, off the injury report, and now he's cheaper than Tevin Coleman despite outproducing him 5 of the last 6 games. So our best bet would be Raheem Mostert. Cheaper, showdown, similar expectations as Coleman, if not better expectations. So fit in Mostert there. Now you have 5,400 left to play with. So you can go 49ers defense as a 7-point home favorite. That leaves you 5,800. And as you see, you can probably get up to some of these other guys if you get tricky with the captain. Whether moving 49ers defense to your captain spot, moving Mostert to your captain spot. There is very real scenarios where you can play low risk contests here, and so we do like that this week for DraftKings. Now, if we jump over to FanDuel and we try to do the same approach, Mostert, Jimmy G, that leaves us with 5,500 left per player, and we'd have to punt this last position. Not the worst thing in the world, because we still feel we have all the touchdowns locked up from both sides, and it's definitely possible to do. Now, you could drop maybe someone like Jimmy G, who's not a high-volume quarterback, but again, it's not something we would recommend. As always, DraftKings is easier than FanDuel for low-risk contests, but if you find some contests against inexperienced players in the lobby, which is what you should be looking for all the time, all week, then you can certainly go with this approach in low-risk contests. All right, let's clear this. All right, let's talk about high-risk contests. It's what everyone loves to play. GPPs, satellites, 100-player leagues, both sites. So the total for this game is at 46.5. It opened at 45. And at Pinnacle Sports, the sharpest sports book in the land, it is basically 46, so about a point up from the open. And that's not quite at that 47-point total mark where we look to start playing pass catchers in our high-risk contests. However, even with that said, both George Kittle, Devontae Adams, who we talked about earlier, are near the top of our model. The thing to consider, and we talked about this on our podcast this week, if you haven't checked it out, it's in your favorite podcast app if you search Occupy Fantasy, or you can look at the video form here on YouTube, is does San Francisco shut down Devontae Adams? He will be a force and a focus of their defense. I mean, this guy went off last week, and while it's not talked about enough, the reason that receivers have huge weeks and then drop off, you'll see receivers go down, 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 up, down, 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 up. The reason most receivers have these down weeks after a huge week is because there's recency bias in NFL coaching staffs as well. They'll look at last week, they saw Devontae Adams go off, and then they'll say in their meetings this week, we can't let Devontae Adams beat us. So whether that's putting Richard Sherman on him, whether that's bracketed coveraging him, whatever it may be, we can be pretty confident that, especially at high ownership, Adams' outlook is definitely not as high as it was after last week. So Adams, while he will be a popular captain, especially on DraftKings, we recommend pivoting if you're going to play any Green Bay receiver. Probably guys like Allen Lazard. Now Lazard, as we mentioned at the top of the video with his injury, he was an underperforming receiver going into last week. The early injury knocked him out, force-fed Devontae Adams. He didn't capitalize. So technically, he's still an underperforming receiver, even though he missed last week's game. So if there is, here's a story you're telling yourself for high-risk contests. If San Francisco shuts down Devontae Adams, or he's a focus of their defense, then maybe Allen Lazard gets more opportunities. And given his opportunity in weeks before last week, he should have scored more fantasy points than he actually did. So that's a pretty good story to tell yourself and some metrics to back it up playing Allen Lazard in your high-risk contest. Now, in a 46-point total mark, we like looking at running backs. Running backs are generally the optimal cap. Let's go back over to DraftKings. Generally the optimal cap. So a guy like Aaron Jones, who was all of a sudden the bell cow last week in the playoffs, 84% of the snaps, that was a season high with Jamal Williams in the lineups. 21 rushing attempts, 2 targets. He had all but 2 of the running back opportunities in the Green Bay backfield last week. He makes sense as a high risk, low total captain on DraftKings. And then we talked about Tevin Coleman, Raheem Mostert, whichever side of that argument you stand on, both those guys are in play as well for your high risk captains. Now, on FanDuel, we can actually take advantage this week because even though Aaron Rodgers had a down year and Jimmy G isn't a high volume passer, they should go under owned compared to what most quarterbacks normally go owned on FanDuel in the MVP spot. I mean, we talked about Mahomes in the last video where he was 44% last week as the MVP. Rodgers and Garoppolo will not approach that number. Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones will take up a ton of ownership. So you can actually get some leverage by playing quarterbacks like Garoppolo and Rodgers in your MVP spot, as they're more likely on a half PPR site to be the optimal MVP. Now, if you use those guys, or if you use any of these popular guys, you want to leave salary over in a 5-man contest or a 5-man lineup like FanDuel. Any guys at the bottom here that stand out? Sure. If we go with that Devontae Adams narrative that he gets shut down, they have a couple guys here, literally 3 in a row: Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Geronimo Allison, Jake Kumerow, all who can score touchdowns. Not likely, but at 5,500, this perfect type of guy to fit in a high-price MVP, fit in those guys. And then, of course, Jimmy Graham and Allen Lazard a little bit higher. 2 other guys we like here, Debo and Emmanuel Sanders. Debo Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders. If we look at our daily plug from this week, not going to bring it up on screen, but I'll talk about it. Emmanuel Sanders has run a route on 96% of Garoppolo's dropbacks since he's come over to San Francisco. Let's bring up Emmanuel Sanders here. And he's relatively underperforming. Hasn't scored a touchdown since week 14, despite having 20 targets in that span. And his 12.4 yards average depth at target leads the team. So Sanders definitely due for some positive regression against Green Bay's corners. He's in a good spot this week if you're looking at high-risk contests. And then Debo Samuel, a little bit safer option, but also high upside with his run after the catch ability. He also has 20 targets since week 15, but he also has 7 rush attempts during that span as well. Literally 1 per game over the last 6 weeks. So Debo, another option, high floor, high ceiling in this matchup. So to conclude, guys like Adams, guys like Kittle are going to be over-owned, whether it's an MVP or in the captain or even in the flex spot. But there are other guys, the running backs in particular, some of these San Francisco receivers that we like, our model likes, that Chris wrote about in our daily plug, that can give you some leverage in high-risk contests. So a great slate where you can play both low risk and high risk on DraftKings, a slate where we can get some leverage at MVP on FanDuel, and you should have more allocation in this single game slate than you should in the Kansas City Titans game earlier in the day. All right, that'll do it. For more in-depth analysis and player notes for this game as well as the Kansas City Tennessee game, go to occupyfantasy.com and check out our daily plug. And also check out our Occupy model, which ranks every player on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Be sure to subscribe below. That way you're notified whenever we release a new DFS video. So definitely do that. Give us a thumbs up. We appreciate it if you like this video. And if you have a question about the slate or have a comment, drop it below. We'll get back to you before this game starts Sunday evening. All right, for Brian Jester, Occupy Fantasy, we appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. Good luck, and we will talk to you soon.